Fredy, I want to talk to you a little bit. You're born in Brooklyn, but your father's from Guatemala. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like for you growing up? Was this a history that was talked about in the household, and how did you then make your own passage onto becoming a forensic anthropologist?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Frank, and thank you, Ryan. The film was really a lot better than I expected. I have to say that to begin with.
It's a good film. It's a good film.
And I know you guys, and I hear Frank saying that this is a good story to tell, but I think we recruited them, but they just didn't know it. And what we were looking for was incredible filmmakers to tell the story of Guatemala. And I was born in Guatemala, but I grew up in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, so I'm kind of not happy right now that the Yankees lost. Because when I was in New York for the first full year, it was in the Bronx, and it was the Yankees against the Dodgers. And it was important for me. And I say that only because I grew up in New York trying to forget Guatemala because it was so painful to leave. And so painful to try to be from a place that no one knew where it was. I mean, even in college, I graduated from Brooklyn College, and people would ask me, what are you doing for the summer? I'm like, I'm driving down to Guatemala. And they're like, how are you going to get across the water? And I was like, no, there is no water. It's right there. As a matter of fact, Guatemala's closer to New York than LA, driving. So just so you know.
It's only a 3-hour flight if you can do it direct. Usually at like 2 o'clock in the morning.
So, we did talk about this sometimes, not often, and it was through some documentaries that were made in the early 80s, like When the Mountains Tremble, that my family kind of came together around the TV and VHS at the time, right, and put a tape in and kind of saw this faraway, terrible place, beautiful, intense, terrible place where not terrible place, terrible things happening in a beautiful place. And for me as a child growing up in New York, it was very difficult to try to handle both of, being an American and being a Guatemalan. And so I put it away. And I became a baseball fan, not a soccer fan. And eventually got to college and kind of wanted to reconnect through Indiana Jones and Spielberg and Harrison Ford and I decided I was going to be a Mesoamerican archaeologist, but instead I found Dr. Clyde Snow and became a forensic anthropologist and wound up doing the most amazing thing, which is looking for people who had disappeared, which I don't know I wouldn't want anyone to try to understand what that means, but most of the people in Guatemala have gone through this and have felt this for 35 years. I don't know if you have ever thought for a second that your child didn't make it to from point A to point B. Imagine that being 35 years long. It's, I spoke to my grandmother before she passed away, and my uncle was taken for 3 days. And in her 90-plus years of living, she describes those 3 days as the worst 3 days of her life. And that's what this was. And Oscar was one of those people, one of the people that was massacred in one of these terrible massacres, and who his father, Tranquilino, thought was dead. If you go, and I told Ryan this when we went up to La Libertad, and we saw the monument, Oscar's name is on there, except it's not Oscar. It's Alfredo Castañeda. His name is on the monument. He's dead. For everyone, he's dead. For his father, too. And when we found him, and when we found Tranquilino alive, it's not about the film. It's not about Oscar. It's about what this means to every one of us and what this could mean to every one of us.